Thank you, everybody. We first want to help you to feel welcome in the city, just like Mayor O'Connor did this morning. Thank you for coming, and thank you for being a part of this event. We'd like to thank Kalia, and we'd like to thank Amanda, of course, for helping to put on such a wonderful event. This is the second time I've had the chance to speak at the Hike 2 Summit. Last year, we were able to talk a little bit about some community work that we're doing. So thank you for having me back. My name is Chris Belasco. I'm the Chief Data Officer at the City of Pittsburgh, and with me is my colleague, Andrew. Do you want to?
Yeah, I'm Andrew Hayhurst. I'm the Senior Manager of Innovation.
And so today we're here to talk a little bit about how the story of getting to our strategy about responsible AI and how we build an AI strategy for an organization that has responsibilities to maintain the public trust, responsibilities to its workers, and how do we make sure that those things happen. And so, one of the things that really kind of actually, before we start getting too much further, I also want to thank and acknowledge our team members who are here. I want to thank Marlena Kane and Will Tang, Shuyan Zhan, who can't be here, right? Because they were instrumental in helping us to develop the strategy in addition to the work that we put in and the listening that we did. So there's kind of a wide community of kind of listeners here, and I just want to thank them too. Not done with thanks. Actually, want to start at a moment where we said leading with values, right? This is our kickoff, right? Our discussion that we want to share with you. We had a conversation last year at Hike 2 during the reception, end of the first day, with Tia Christopher, who is of Orange Peel Collaborative and is also working with us, right? And she said, you can do this by leading with your values. And it gave us kind of a little bit of license to feel comfortable with that, because here we were kind of talking to somebody who was a third party who gave us a little bit of informal advice, right? Saying, hey, this is a space that, if this is important to you, it should be important to your strategy. And so we actually really appreciated that, and I think that that's also an acknowledgement we want to start out with here. Andrew, do you want to?
Yeah, so 2023, like everyone else, ChatGPT comes onto the scene. And immediately, we start seeing people on our network using it. We hear about it from directors and everyone about how this is kind of infiltrating the city employees. And there was a big kind of scare and push and decision what had to be made. Like, do we block AI or do we try to figure out a better way, right? So there was precedent to block AI. Lots of big cities had done it. Chicago had famously said, if you're ever on a meeting with an AI tool, you need to get off that meeting immediately. They didn't allow ChatGPT or any of the tools to be on their network. The same thing with Allegheny County. And so there was definitely precedent to take that approach. But we wanted to make sure that we forged ahead. And one of the things when I started with the city in 2016, we did a lot of effort to replace what we call technical debt. The city used to have decentralized IT. We had every department made their own purchases for software and for hardware and devices and everything like that. And as a result, we were so far behind in being able to manage our IT infrastructure and our IT assets. And so we didn't want to fall. I definitely didn't want to fall into that same kind of mindset. So we had to figure out a better way. And so we chose to prepare by establishing guardrails, training our employees, and really focusing on trying to bring experimentation to the workforce so that we could do this responsibly and correctly. And so 2023, tools are on everywhere. So immediately in 2024, we decided to establish AI standards and guidelines. And we were very specific about calling it standards and guidelines and not a policy, not a strategy. We wanted to use those words to make sure that people knew, you can use AI. You should be using AI, but we want you to fit it into this box and make sure that you're following our values and our standards. And so we published our first AI standards in almost 2 years ago, so February of 2024. And then we started kicking off monthly AI workshops. And our first AI workshop, we called it ChatGPT 101, and we invited, the entire city to come to this. I think we had 80 people that came and attended, and it worked out really well. Lots of people were super interested in what AI could provide, But we also have a lot of people that are still hesitant and adverse to using AI, which makes sense. In 2025, we republished our AI standards and guidelines. We took what we learned from that first year and made updates to that and republished those in November of 2025. And now we are expanding responsible AI use with our AI workforce, our working group that we use, and we're trying to create use cases and productivity plays that we can use to direct AI usage throughout the city.
Thanks. And so, we said we're leading with values. I want to tell you a little bit about the values that we want to bring into the work that we're doing to introduce a new technology tool, that's what we're talking about here, to the workforce. And so, we take this approach that, technology is here to serve people. It's here to help improve prosperity. It's something that we want to serve communities with. We are also in charge of determining how we want to kind of set our course for technology. And so, our approach for this was that AI should enhance public servants, and it should not replace them. And so, we had, received some feedback from members of City Council where they were very concerned about this, and we appreciated that because it was aligned with our values. And when, we started to do this work, and like I said, about March 2025, right? And when we, had a mayoral transition, we sat down with, the new folks who are involved with, really trying to integrate tools in the workforce and their curiosity and wanted to lead. And, we found value alignment in the same things, right? Because, we're all trying to go into public sector, work. We're all trying to be public servants. We actually need the people who are working with us. And one of the things that they contribute the most is their work knowledge, right? And so that's something that we're not trying to replace. In fact, we need to figure out how tools can enhance their work. What's bringing them to work every day, what's bringing me to work every day in the public sector is wanting to serve the public, right? And so how do we make it more possible for that to happen? That's what we're interested in. And so, we wanted to think about how we could build capacity within our workforce before scaling tools. We wanted to think about ways to use technology to help improve service delivery. We're very interested in, kind of engaging with basic services. We're not trying to replace any basic services. We want to make sure that it's possible that people have tools to do the work. We also, we're here talking today to an industry group, right? I mean, this is one start. We want to maintain transparency to help build public trust in the work that we're doing, and so we engage on these things. We've been engaging with some community members, telling them about how we use technology, and so our approach is to be community oriented within the city, right? We represent, even though I'm not an elected representative, right? We represent the people who live in the city, and so we want to help strengthen their communities, right? And we want to help them have tools, that they can trust. So when we're thinking about the ethics of a deployment, we want to make sure that it's something that actually, serves to benefit, a community or community member or community representatives. And so, Pittsburgh's embedded within this, the mayor said this morning, we've got all these different partners around, right? And we're embedded in a responsible AI ecosystem. And so it's important to just start by saying, if we're building a responsible AI strategy, we didn't build this alone, right? Hear that now, because we've been listening to our partners all the way throughout this work. And so there's kind of three different sets of universe for that, right? We've got the external collaborators who have been kind of keying in to help kind of create connections to governments. And one of them is led by the city of San Jose, which is called the GovAI Coalition. And we've been coalition members since the inception. Team members have had the opportunity to travel and learn about responsible AI adoption at their conferences over the last 2 years. The Bloomberg Philanthropies has set up something called City AI Connect to help connect cities both to innovation and to have conversations about responsible use of AI. In addition to that, we have a relationship with this organization called Partners for Public Good. They used to be associated with Harvard University, and what they do is they help public sector agencies figure out how to deploy technology and make procurements that make sense. But that's the broader national ecosystem. We participate with these partners, and we work, learning from them all the time. we have this marvelous local ecosystem. And so starting to think about algorithms with the city, right? Algorithms being a wider set of AI that we're talking about here, right? Led with the partners at Pitt Cyber, the Pitt Institute for Cyber Law and Policy. And so the executive director of that, Beth Schwanke, has been like a great friend to the city, a trusted advisor in helping us to make decisions to help deploy technology. And so, we've had partnerships with her, some CMU faculty who think about responsible AI, and helped us to think about how to build technology requirements that enable disclosure of AI tools when softwares are being offered to us or technology is being offered to us. We're a founding member of the Western Pennsylvania Regional Data Center, and we work very closely with them to help make data available, but also hear things from the community, right? And so our partnership with WPRDC, as we shorten it, which is a mouthful in its own, right? We help to make better technology decisions by thinking together with WPRDC. And in addition to that, over the past year, we initiated community meetings with representatives from all over the city that have been traditionally excluded from technology decisions. And we've invited them in. It's taken some, how do we communicate and establish the trust? But what we've done is we've gotten really good feedback on how to be kind of more inclusive, more culturally sensitive, and better deploy technology by hearing and thinking about the values that are embedded within our communities. This is translated to doing work at the internal level. So I shouted out Will and Marlena earlier. They're leading our AI working group. We've embedded the policy work that we're doing within the data governance committee that we established to help guide technology policy at the data level for the city. So the data governance committee team got a crack at sort of looking at our strategy. They got a crack at looking at our AI standards to make sure that it was consistent with their concerns about using technology, because they actually were, right? And it was consistent with our needs to be able to start thinking about how to use tools to process data. And so in addition to that, so we've helped to stand up this kind of AI working group to surface problems, and Andrew will tell you about productivity plays in a moment. We've also done staff workshops and a monthly training. It started as a term called ChatGPT 101. We've evolved that as we've taken on an enterprise AI tool, Copilot Chat. So it's a very simple tool, but it helps us to sort of preserve data within our own ecosystem. That work is led by Will and Marlena, and so it's kind of like adaptation work to offer the opportunity to take on a new tool as interested. I'll turn it back over.
Yeah, so again, our goal was to establish standards before we scale and move on to the bigger, higher ticket units, right? We kind of talked through this before, so I'll make this quick, but rapid growth in AI and experimentation in 2023, we had a lot of data privacy concerns, and there was a lot of push from our directors and senior leaders to put in a policy in place so that we could be punitive and punish people for using AI. A lot of people did it inappropriately, and so we needed to get out ahead of that. So in 2024, again, we pushed out our AI usage standards. We provided these guardrails and helped them understand what data was appropriate to put in to enterprise application like ChatGPT, and so we talked through those different kind of examples and use cases, and specifically the Western Pennsylvania Data Center, right? All of that data is public, so there is no harm in being able to use that in ChatGPT and to upload it and try and find insights from that with ChatGPT. We always wanted to make sure that we keep the human in a loop. That's the first time I think I've heard that today, so we'll see how we should have a counter. But we want people to be responsible and accountable for what they push out and what they publish using ChatGPT, and that we have an expectation of transparency. Again, in 2025, we updated our standards and we came out with version 2. Microsoft had made Copilot Chat available to the government tenant. And so at that point, it made sense to try and steer our employees to Copilot Chat. One, it's within our own security database and standards. So there would be no data leakage because it stays within our own tenant. So it took away a lot of the risk that we had with the the publicly available tools. So we're encouraging people to use Copilot Chat. That does not mean they can't use other tools, because there's a ton of really great tools out there. But if you're working with sensitive data, proprietary data within the city government, you should be using Copilot Chat. And then, we clarified the acceptable tools. We used Homeland Security had done a lot of work on this in doing risk assessments and cyber assessments on these tools. So we were able to piggyback off of what Homeland Security had used, and we just used their assessments, and we published that and said these are the acceptable tools that you can use. We've also instilled a process where you can request use of these tools. And so people can go through our service request, and our cybersecurity team, our applications team, and our data security team all review application requests. And so if there is a new AI tool that you want to use, we have a process in place where you can go get that reviewed and approved.
Yeah, that risk management component is very important. Right. And so, I really appreciate it. You want to tell them about the standards, our core standards that we have?
Yeah, and we use this slide in every workshop, and it's everywhere. So we want it to be front and center, and we want people to talk about it. So really for AI not guiding principles, I'm sorry. These are our core guidelines, right? So use the city's recommended generative AI tool, Copilot Chat right now. We want people to protect city data and the privacy of residents. So be smart about what you're putting into commercial generative AI tools, where accountability is huge, right? If you make a mistake, you're going to be held accountable for that. But we also want people to be transparent and understand that we're not going to punish you for using these tools, but let people know.
Yeah. So this is the header of all of our AI standards that we've written or redrafted. We take these kind of core principles seriously, and we go into some significant detail on use cases, appropriateness in our standards to make sure that people have a chance to align. We then carry it over into our workshops, and we talk about appropriate use. When people participate in our workshops, it's kind of inescapable, So one of the things that we're now trying to do, right, is build that kind of workforce strategy out, right, and offer to our employees the opportunity to build AI literacy. So we don't just want to be like, hey, be sensitive about city data, right? We don't want to put data that might expose somebody's information into a tool that might be used by the public. We have internal tools for that, right? So we start there, but we want to make sure that people have the opportunity to extend their capabilities. And so, we've mentioned the monthly workshops. This helps us underscore the usage standards, helps us to build live coaching, helps us to establish demonstration sessions on how to write effective prompts and get the most out of your engagement with the tool. There have been a couple, and they've been complex and simple and interesting, no question, right? Prompt engineering workshops. We started by calling them prompt engineering. We started to simplify it down to how do you write a simple prompt that's effective? How do you get something effective out of a chatbot interface? We're working within the work group that we mentioned earlier, which meets on a monthly basis, to establish AI champions. So people who want to come forward and say, here's an innovation that I've done, and here's a way for us to be able to diffuse that knowledge across the city. The other thing is, when people start to see the applicability of the tool, then they can marshal forward new examples and use cases. We want to find people, right, who are able to help us with that, right? Because we don't see it all, but they do, and especially when they're closer to the work. And so we're doing this kind of departmental use case exploration, right, to help make it possible for people to see what they want to, enable in the tools that we have. And so, we're also bringing literacy to and authenticity to, requiring human review for AI outputs, right? It's great if you asked, Copilot Chat to help you, to develop a document, but you have to go through that document afterward. That's your responsibility to the residents of the city of Pittsburgh. Have transparency and document when AI is being used, adhere to the city standards that we have established, and we do monitoring, on the different places that people visit so that we have an understanding of that. And so we have governance expectations. And we communicate that to the city staff when we hold these workshops. But we want to be, the mayor said something really, really interesting this morning that I want to kind of key back in. He's showing you how government can be an enabler, right? Enabling partnerships, enabling residents to be able to enjoy the surroundings and encouraging people to come here and live, right? We're taking a cue from that, right? We want to be enablers. We want to enable people to experiment using the tools that they've been provided while maintaining trust and managing risk. And that's to us, kind of the foundation of doing responsible AI. One of the things that it's important to shout out here is that we've got a really innovative partnership structure that we apply here in the city. Do you want to mention that for a second? Tell us about PGH Lab.
Yes. PGH Lab is our incubator program that we use for the City of Pittsburgh. It is a 6-month pilot program that allows startups within the city to come forth and pilot their solutions within city government. It gives the city and our departments the opportunity to really understand what technology is out there and how we can try to adopt this into operations. But it also really provides a great foundation for startup communities, and it's showing that the city is investing in the startup community. Since 2023, PGH Lab, actually this is the 10th year of PGH Lab, and so we're pretty proud of that, and we're on our 11th cohort. But in 2023, we made this huge left turn. And before, it was a voluntary program. Now we pay these companies. We pay them $25,000 for a 6-month pilot. And it's been really great. So far, we've invested $300,000 into the local ecosystem, and we've piloted 12. We're in the 12th company cohort. So really proud. It's a great opportunity. And for any of you that are startup communities within Pittsburgh, please reach out to us, especially as we get into more of the productivity plays, if you can help us out.
Feeling empowered by hey, you could start your AI strategy with your values, enabled a relationship with Orangefield Collaborative. They applied to the current PGH Lab round, and they are one of the cohort members. And so we are just in the process of starting our work under our scope of work with them. We've been doing thinking, planning, inviting them to some of our meetings to help kind of get the vibe of what we're doing. And so they're offering a handful of services that are really extremely valuable to the city to help us, kind of accelerate the strategic work. The first that isn't actually truly listed on here, it's kind of buried in here, is that we're doing a climate survey, right? And trying to get a sense of the values that are held by the staff now, so that we can better target our multi-level generative AI training workshops that we're going to roll out. We'll ultimately end up doing a follow-on survey at the end of this to find out how this went. So we're starting there. They'll have kind of pre and post assessments too. I'm a data nerd, you know how it is. And then we're gonna work on kind of rolling out some communication strategy about this strategy we're talking about with you today. And so we're going to make sure that our communication kind of happens in plain language, so it doesn't get too jargony or technical. That we have stakeholder ready how to use AI responsibly. Communication. I mentioned the survey. We're kind of starting there, and we're going to help document the success stories of work. Leading technology adaptation is really a culture story, right? And so this is really helping us to kind of turbocharge that work. And so at the end, or as we kind of complete our work, we're going to build a case study to help show how we're not here to replace city workers, right? We're here to help city workers have a new way to do their work that would extend their capacity to do so. And so we're calling that the augmentation, not replacement case study. We hope to be able to publicize that later in the year. You want to tell them about the...
Yeah, from guidance to governance, right? So we're just using this continuum to try and focus on how we make sure that we're using and innovating appropriately, right? So workforce training and standards, we've kind of hit on a lot. We also have an AI registry, and so we're trying to build public trust and get folks to understand what are acceptable tools to use. there's a slide down the road talking about productivity play. So we've used some like risk-based assessments on those productivity plays. And so we're trying to understand like what's the most value versus risk that we could bring. And then again, the AI working group and our cross-government collaboration. So like we are trying to work across not only city departments, but also across government. So we've done a lot of work with Allegheny County, and we're talking about how we can share AI standards and help them grow. We're also putting on a workshop in May for the local government academy. So the small municipalities throughout Allegheny County who don't have resources like this that can focus on AI, we're trying to bridge that gap for them. So we're lucky to have like a good team that can put resource behind this, and we're trying to invest that back into our communities as well.
Yeah, we promised you values, so we wanted to get to them. We're leading with kind of charging to use generative AI responsibly. Focus in uses of AI on making Pittsburgh a better place for all. Improving worker productivity instead of substituting. Thinking about generative AI as a technology solution that really only should be used in cases that add value to city work. We're not trying to do AI for AI's sake here. We're not trying to pad the usage stats of any models that are out there. It's really about like, if this doesn't provide value. We had a nice conversation in one of our recent workshops. If it's not working for you, we're not forcing it. This strategy is technology agnostic, right? What we want to do is build from use cases to understand what we want to do. We have adopted an enterprise tool, but it's about solving for the needs that we have on storing information securely and privately. We have followed federal guidance on rights and safety and included that into our set of values with detailed explanations for that. And one of the more ironic things that I think I've observed is the rights and safety stuff has carried through the federal government, both from the previous Office of Management and Budget Administrators to the current ones. The language has changed slightly, but the core values are still there. And so, we refer to those things, the values of upholding rights and safety in our strategy and in our values. And then finally, we've talked about, building this work and being sensitive to risk and being aware of AI's limitations, possibilities of hallucination, incorrect results. And so we're cautioning our employees and people who think about our strategy to just maintain awareness of those risks and limitations.
All right, the good stuff. Productivity plays. So we were very purposeful, and we've talked about this up here, right? Like, language does matter. And with the fear that we have throughout a lot of city employees, the idea that we're going to take their jobs, right? We wanted to make sure that we're using words that didn't scare them away. And so we came up with the idea of trying to use the term productivity plays. These are tools that you can pull out of your tool basket to use to help make your job easier, right? And we came up with 22 productivity plays, and some of them are based on these kind of like big overarching areas like decision support, content and communication, operations, right? And from there, we also took the effort of going through and doing a risk assessment. So we decided, based on these productivity plays, what's the biggest risk? And like that took into account, what data is being collected to use this, and is there privacy concerns? How does this impact? Is it difficult, and can we achieve it and implement it? So like all of these kind of like risks we took into account, and we put a risk score next to all of the 22 different productivity plays, which we have also now we have more than 22. But
yeah, sure. Now that we have a work group and we're surfacing opportunities, we're kind of getting to this space where we're trying to make that a more natural thing. You want to?
Yeah, so with that in mind, we took our 22 productivity plays, and with our AI working group, we started trying to hone in on where we should focus and prioritize. And so, the standard 4-box impact difficulty matrix, everybody loves one of these. And so we took this in our group, and we talked about each productivity play, and then we tried to determine, where that falls into the quadrant. And you can go ahead.
Do you want to computer enhance?
Yes. So anybody who has done these, right, you understand there's like the quick wins or best bets, right? And so that's where we're trying to focus on. In the quadrant just above this, you'll see there was the permitting process, right? And the mayor's very adamant about trying to use that. And so that is one of the things that is, a strategic plan that we need to reach to and put more resources to. But the best bets were the ones that we decided would be easy to implement and high impact. And so I'm going to share some of these. So if some of you have ability to help us on these, PGH Lab in September will be opening again, so we'd encourage you to apply. But on the far right, we talked about like recycling coach. Nobody knows what to put into our recycling containers. Does this plastic, do these egg cartons? So like there are other cities that are doing this where you can actually just make it very easy to scan it, and it will help you decide what to do or understand when recycling is in your particular location, right? So like recycling coach is like the quickest win that we can get. It's high impact, low risk, low difficulty. And then as we work kind of like left to right, we want to really have a better sense of like how we're tracking the usage of our parks and see what we can do with that, right? Like we just got a new rad park, Hayes Green, into the city, right? And nobody really knows who's using it, how or why. So we would love to like have a better understanding of how our parks are generating uses, what are people doing in our parks, and are we putting resources to the right parks? And then just working through like flag data for fraud or risk. We wanted meetings and event summaries. As I said before, there were like Chicago. If anybody joined, you were told to like just get off the line and like not take part in that meeting, that online meeting that had an AI assistant. So we want to make sure that our teams have these resources that are incredibly valuable and save lots of time and available. So. Yeah, anything you'd like to add?
Yeah, just to say that my team is really excited about opportunities to improve or in a trustworthy way, help make visualizations a little bit clearer, or get to a place where their code has a review, right? Or they have an idea and they can put it into a prompt and they can bring code back safely that they can choose to deploy. Right, and so that's a space where my team has been really interested in this. But like, the applications for this work, flagging data, this is where moving from something that goes from data loss prevention into like proactive monitoring is a space that the city is particularly interested in to help maintain the protection of our data and privacy. So, we continue with values in our strategy. We think that responsible AI requires 4 capabilities. Prioritizing human-centered approaches that are transparent, fair, and accountable use with continuous monitoring kind of summarizes our ethical approach. That we're going to take a continuous improvement approach to this, that we're testing tools, we evaluate them. Our cybersecurity applications, my team evaluates them. We think about where there are risks, and we look for opportunities to remediate to ensure that there are safe and accurate AI deployments. We brought some disclosure requirements into our technical requirements for our procurements. And so we say, tell us about the AI that you're using, tell us about the model, tell us about the sense of accuracy that's included in this. We worked with Carnegie Mellon on that. We actually also imported some information from the GovAI Coalition to help make sure that what we were getting when we were doing procurements was transparent disclosure of use of AI in our systems. And so finally, enablement, thinking about how, this is an arc, especially for organizations that do have technical debt and have been digging out of technical debt, to make sure that your systems and files are actually prepared to be able to use, more kind of, extensive tools, like a Microsoft 365 Copilot, for example, versus a Copilot chat, right? Right now, we're comfortable with, hey, you got to upload that file to be able to do this work, rather than, hey, let's run this on the entire system. And so, thinking about enablement and building a pathway to that to extend the capacities to, our teams.
Yeah, the one thing I would add to that,
Sorry.
we're adding these to our RFPs and our requirements. So if you are out there and you're going to apply to an RFP, one of the questions will be, assess the bias in your model. So whatever you do, please don't say, this model does not have any bias. Like that has happened before, and we will laugh at you, so don't do that.
I love the confidence in that, though. Do you want to tell them about an early use case?
Yeah, so the mayor brought this up earlier. The 2050 comp plan that the city's working on, it's really led by our city planning department. But they asked us to help. They had all these like documents out there that were talking about the goals and the direction that residents and people want to take in the city by 2050, I'm sorry. And so the idea came up that they could add a chatbot that would comb through all these different reports and help answer residents' questions on these reports. We were very cautious about this. This was actually coming out right during the primary for governor or for mayor. So it was something that was like very sensitive timeline. But we wanted to make sure that the public could use these tools and be available. So what we did is we used lots of opportunities to test these. We brought in teams to come in and think about ways that we could break these and understand like what are some of the guide rails that we should get this vendor to do to add into it. And so that's what happened. The vendor added a lot of guide rails that really only allowed it to focus on the reports, which they didn't think about that before. We also we asked them to bring in the citation of reports. So like in the response, it would bring back exactly in these like huge documents where they're pulling that from. And you can kind of see that from like the blue dots and the yellow. And so we really just wanted to give city planning the tools that they needed, but also help them to make sure that it's a product that won't have political sensitivities involved.
Yeah, we were very concerned that misuse of a tool that was kind of not fully considered with some of the guide rails, could impact something politics in a way that we didn't want to impact. So we actually slowed down the implementation, waited till after the election, and then eventually rolled the chatbot out, because the last thing we wanted to do was for anybody in the political context or contest to begin to use a tool that was developed for the comp plan in this direction. So. And I'll just also shout my team out here. They built, some high-value use cases that they've kind of started with at the kind of. It may have 3 users, but it makes like a world of difference to them, right? And so 3 of them have kind of. One of them was sort of unstructured data in fitness tests. So like if you're like running your fitness test when you're trying to join one of our service departments, that data is actually collected in the field. It turns out, and we tried with computers, right, to try to collect that data digitally in the field, and it turns out it was easier to collect it in bad weather with pen and paper. So how do we get that pen and paper back over into something that we could put into a table and then begin to sum up and allow people to have faster access to scores than they weren't waiting around all day? And so we started to accept the forms as unstructured data, provide structure to it, and then build the tables out for calculation in our systems. We're working through the same things right now to read our utility invoices, because otherwise somebody is manually processing those, and that person could do a lot more interesting things with their work knowledge than having to key those in, right? And then finally, we'll also digitize some of our past records that were living in a card catalog in one of our departments. And like, while I love that, I also don't want to perpetuate that. So we've read them in. We've done some field testing of that to help provide digital access to those records, because then it's a heck of a lot easier to search them and index them. And so the key here is to make sure that you're using the right tool. We've been working on this with low risk use cases. We've encouraged responsible use through the collaboration between teams, and we've fostered a culture of working with AI, right? So having open communication, having teams that are willing to work with our team to implement these solutions builds confidence on the next one that we're going to work on together.